The Journey of Kofi, Part 2. In the days that followed, Kofi felt a weight settle over him. He kept the stone of remembrance hidden under his tunic, its warmth a constant reminder of the task that lay ahead. Yet he had no idea where to begin. The villagers of Akyem were simple folk, hard-working, superstitious, and fearful of the unknown. To speak of spirits, of a balance that needed to be restored, would surely make them shun him. But Kofi's heart was heavy with the knowledge that time was running out. He confided in no one except Amma. Amma had been Kofi's closest friend since childhood. She was bold and quick-witted, always teasing Kofi for being too serious. With her wide smile and mischievous eyes, she brought light to Kofi's otherwise quiet existence. She lived with her grandmother on the outskirts of the village, and rumors swirled that Amma's family had a dark past, though Amma herself had always been a bright soul, loved by everyone. One evening, as they sat by the river, Amma noticed the distant look in Kofi's eyes. "What's wrong, Kofi?" she asked, dipping her fingers into the cool water. "You've been different these past few days." Kofi hesitated. He had promised himself he wouldn't involve Amma in the strange happenings of the spirit world, but his heart longed to share the burden with someone. I heard something," Kofi began, his voice barely above a whisper. "From the spirits." Amma's brow furrowed. "The spirits? What do you mean?" Kofi took a deep breath and told her everything: the voice in the forest, the meeting with the ancestors, and the task that now weighed heavily on his shoulders. Amma listened in silence, her usual playful expression replaced by one of deep concern. When Kofi finished, she said nothing for a long moment. Finally she spoke, her voice unusually quiet. Do you really believe it? That the spirit spoke to you?" Kofi nodded. "I don't just believe it, Amma. I know it, and I'm afraid." Amma reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to do this alone, Kofi. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side." Kofi smiled, though the unease in his heart remained. Amma's presence was comforting, but a strange feeling gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. A whisper almost that something was not quite right. That night, Kofi's sleep was plagued with dreams. He saw the village of Akyem bathed in moonlight, but something was wrong. The air was thick with dread, and in the distance, he could hear weeping. He wandered through the village, searching for the source of the sorrow. But the farther he walked, the louder the crying grew. Finally he came to the river, where a figure stood at the water's edge. It was Amma. She was weeping, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But when Kofi called her name, she turned to face him, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Amma's eyes were dark, hollow pits, her face twisted into an expression of sorrow and rage. She reached out to him, her fingers coiling like claws. "Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "Help me, Kofi." Kofi awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The stone of remembrance was glowing faintly beside him, as if reacting to his fear. He wiped the sweat from his brow trying to shake the image of Amma from his mind. It was just a dream, he told himself, but the unease remained festering like a dark shadow in the corners of his thoughts. The next morning, Kofi sought out Nana Aqua, the village's oldest and wisest elder. She was known for her knowledge of the spirit world, and Kofi hoped she could provide some guidance. He found her sitting outside her hut, her weathered hands weaving a basket from palm fronds. "Nana Aqua," Kofi said, bowing respectfully. "I need your counsel." The old woman looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing. "What troubles you, boy?" Kofi hesitated, then told her of his encounter with the spirits and the task that had been placed upon him. Nana Aqua listened in silence, her fingers still walking the fronds as she absorbed his words. When he finished, she sighed deeply. "The spirits are wise, but they are not always kind. The balance between the living and the dead is fragile, and it is not easily restored." Kofi frowned. "But how do I restore it? How do I remind the village of the spirits without causing fear?" Nana Aqua's gaze grew distant. "It is not fear you should worry about, Kofi. It is something far darker." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Beware of those closest to you, for sometimes the greatest danger comes from within." Kofi's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Nana Aqua leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There is an ancient evil that lurks in the shadows of this village, Kofi. A spirit known as Ogbanje that has walked among us for generations, taking different forms, bringing grief and sorrow wherever it goes. It preys upon the unsuspecting, always returning, always causing suffering." Kofi felt a chill run down his spine. "But how do I find it?" Nana Aqua's eyes darkened. "You may not need to look far, boy. The Ogbanje hides in plain sight, often in the form of those we love." Kofi left Nana Aqua's hut with a heavy heart. Her warning echoed in his ears, the thoughts of an Ogbanje, a malevolent spirit walking among the villagers, filled him with dread. Could it be possible that someone he knew was the reincarnation of this ancient evil? And if so, who? As he wandered through the village, his thoughts kept returning to Amma. He recalled the dream, her twisted face, the hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage. Could she be the one Nana Aqua had warned him about? It seemed impossible. Amma was his closest friend, the kindest person he knew. But the seed of doubt had been planted and Kofi couldn't shake it. That evening, Kofi couldn't ignore the growing unease. He sought out Amma once more, determined to rid himself of the gnawing fear that had taken root in his heart. They met at their usual spot by the river, where the soft sound of the flowing water usually brought him comfort. But tonight, the air felt different, heavy. Amma was sitting on a rock, gazing at the moonlight shimmering on the water's surface. She looked peaceful, so serene that Kofi almost felt foolish for suspecting her of anything. Yet, Nana Aqua's warning rang in his ears, refusing to be dismissed. "Kofi, you look like you've seen a ghost," Amma teased, when she saw him approached, her smile warm and bright as always. "What's troubling you this time?" Kofi sat beside her, staring at the river but not really seeing it. "Ama, do you believe that some spirits can live among us, hidden inside those we love?" Ama's laughter broke the stillness, light and carefree. "Kofi, what kind of question is that? You've been spending too much time with the elders." But when she noticed the seriousness in his expression, her laughter faded, and concern filled her eyes. "Why are you asking me this? What have the spirits told you now?" Kofi swallowed hard, unsure of how to say the words. "There's a story, a legend about a spirit called Ogbanje. It's said to bring grief, returning over and over, reincarnating in different forms. It hides in those we care about." Amma tilted her head, her brow furrowed. "I've heard stories of the Ogbanje. Some say it's just an old myth to explain why some children die young. What does it have to do with us?" Kofi hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. The words hung on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't bear to accuse Amma of being something she herself didn't even know she was. If Nana Akwa's warnings were true. Instead, he sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know. I'm just confused." Amma reached over, taking his hand in hers. "Kofi, whatever happens, we'll face it together. The spirits, the village, everything. You've always been the brave one, but you don't have to carry this burden alone." Her touch was warm, and for a moment Kofi felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Nana Akwa was wrong. Maybe this darkness that lingered in his thoughts was just fear playing tricks on him. He squeezed her hand in return, feeling a bit of the tension leave his body. "Thank you, Amma. I don't know what I'd do without you." But as they sat in silence, watching the river under the moonlight, the unsettling feeling refused to fully leave him. Days passed, and life in Akyem went on as usual. The villagers harvested crops, held ceremonies, and gathered at the village center in the evenings for storytelling and music. But beneath the surface, Kofi's anxiety continued to grow. He couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming, that the Ogbanje was near. The dreams returned, each one darker than the last. In one, Kofi saw the village engulfed in flames, the people running in terror as shadowy figures moved through the smoke. At the center of it all was Amma, standing in the middle of the chaos, her face twisted in pain, her eyes filled with sorrow and rage. "Help me!" she cried, reaching out to Kofi as he stood frozen in place. "Help me, Kofi, before it's too late." He would wake each morning drenched in sweat, the stone of remembrance glowing faintly under his pillow. The spirits were trying to tell him something. But what? Could Amma truly be the Ogbanje? The thoughts made his heart ache, but the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. One evening, after another haunting dream, Kofi decided to seek out Nana Akwa again. She had given him the warning, but she hadn't told him how to stop it, how to save Amma. If she was indeed the one who carried this ancient evil inside her. When Kofi arrived at her hut, the old woman was already waiting for him, as she had known he would come. "You've seen the signs, haven't you?" she said without preamble. Her voice a low rasp in the dim light of the fire. The dreams, the visions, they are not just tricks of the mind, boy. The spirits are speaking to you. Kofi nodded, his hands trembling. I don't want to believe it, Nana. Ama, she's my closest friend. She can't be the Ogbanje. Nana Akwa's eyes softened with a mixture of pity and understanding. The Ogbanje rarely knows what it is, Kofi. It lives as a human, unaware of its true nature, until the time comes for the cycle to begin again. Your friend Ama may not have any idea what fate lies within her, but if the balance isn't restored, she would bring grief to this village. It's in her nature. Kofi's breath caught in his throat. But how do I stop it? How do I save her? Nana Akwa stood slowly, her old bones creaking as she moved toward the fire. The only way to break the cycle of the Ogbanje is to find its Iuwa, the object that ties its spirit to this world. The Ogbanje hides this object, and until it's found and destroyed, the spirit will continue to reincarnate, bringing suffering each time. Kofi's heart pounded. Do you know where it is? The elder shook her head. No, but Ama might. She may not know it consciously, but the Ogbanje within her will have hidden it somewhere. You must convince her to help you find it. Only then can the cycle be broken. Kofi's mind reeled with the enormity of the task ahead. Convincing Ama to search for something she didn't even know existed? How could he ask her to face such a terrible truth? But there was no other choice. The balance had to be restored, and if it wasn't, the village would suffer. The next day, Kofi sought out Ama, his stomach tied in knots. They met by the river, as they always did, but this time, Kofi could hardly look into her eyes. The weight of what he had to tell her was almost too much to bear. Ama, he began, his voice barely audible. I need to talk to you about something important. Ama looked at him, her usual smile fading as she sensed the gravity of his words. What is it, Kofi? You're scaring me. Kofi took a deep breath, then told her everything about the Ogbanje, about the dreams, about what Nana Akwa had said. As he spoke, Ama's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to fear. Kofi, you are saying that I am this spirit? Ama's voice trembled, her hands clenching in her lap. That I'm going to bring grief to the village? Kofi hated seeing the fear in her eyes, but he couldn't lie to her. I don't want to believe it, Ama, but the signs, the dreams, they're pointing to you. Nana Akwa said there's a way to stop it, though. We just need to find the Iuwa, the object that ties you, that ties your spirit to the Ogbanje. Ama shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. But I don't know anything about that, Kofi. How am I supposed to help you find something I've never seen? Kofi reached for her hand, holding it tightly. We'll figure it out together, I promise. I won't let anything happen to you. We'll find the Iuwa and break the cycle. You're not alone in this. Ama's tears spilled over, but she nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. Okay, Kofi, I trust you. Over the next few days, Kofi and Ama searched the village and the surrounding forest, looking for any sign of the Iyiuwa. They combed through places where Ama had spent her childhood, hoping that her subconscious might guide them to the hidden object. But no matter how hard they looked, they found nothing. As the days passed, Kofi's dreams grew darker. The village was always in flames, and the weeping grew louder. The spirits were growing impatient. One night, after another fruitless day of searching, Kofi and Ama sat by the river, exhaustion weighing heavily on them both. Kofi stared at the water, feeling despair creeping into his heart. What if they couldn't find the Iyiuwa? What if it was already too late? Suddenly, Ama gasped, her eyes widening in shock. Kofi, I remember. Kofi looked at her, startled. What do you mean? Ama's voice was barely a whisper. When I was little, my grandmother used to tell me a story. She said that when I was born, she found me holding a strange stone in my hand, a stone that glowed, just like the one you showed me from the spirits. She buried it under the old tree behind our house, saying it was bad luck. Kofi's heart raced. D.E.? Ama's voice trembled as she continued. She said it was bad luck for a child to be born holding such a stone. She buried it deep beneath the roots of the tree and told me never to dig it up. I had forgotten about it until now. Kofi's breath caught in his throat. This had to be it. The Iyiuwa, the object that bounds Ama, her spirit to the Ogbanje. He felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly followed by a chill of fear. If they found the stone, it would confirm everything. The darkness that locked within Ama, the curse that had followed her all her life without her knowing it. Ama, Kofi said gently, we need to go there. If it's what I think it is, we have to find it and destroy it. Ama looked at him with wide, fearful eyes, but she nodded, determination flickering in her gaze. Let's go. Under the cover of night, Kofi and Ama made their way to her grandmother's house on the outskirts of the village. The old woman was long gone, but the house still stood, its roof sagging, its windows dark and empty. Behind the house, the large tree loomed like a sentinel, its gnarled roots twisting into the earth. The air was thick with tension as they stood before the tree. The moon casting long shadows over the ground, Kofi could feel the weight of the spirits around him. Watching, waiting, he glanced at Ama, who was clutching her arms, her eyes fixed on the spot where the stone had been buried so many years ago. This is it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without another word, Kofi knelt beside the roots of the tree and began to dig with his hands. The earth was cold and damp, clinging to his fingers as they walked. Ama joined him, and together they dug deeper and deeper, the silence around them broken only by the sound of their labored breathing. After what felt like an eternity, Kofi's fingers brushed against something solid. His heart leaped into his throat as he cleared away the dirt, revealing a small glowing stone nestled in the earth. It pulsed with a faint, airy light, just as the stone of remembrance had. This is it, Kofi said, his voice barely above a whisper. He lifted the stone from the ground, feeling its warmth in his hand. It was strange, almost alive, and as he held it, he could feel the presence of the Ogbanje, not as a malevolent force, but as a confused, restless spirit. Amma stared at the stone, her face pale. "What do we do now?" Kofi swallowed hard. "We have to destroy it." Amma hesitated, her hand hovering over the stone. What if destroying it hurts me, Kofi? What if it's too late?" Kofi met her gaze, his heart aching for his friend. "Amma, I don't believe that. I believe the spirits want to set you free. You've done nothing wrong. You didn't ask for this." She nodded, though her hands were trembling. "Okay, let's do it." Kofi took a deep breath, gripping the stone tightly in his hand. He raised it high above his head and, with a cry of determination, brought it down hard on the nearest rock. The stone shattered with a crack, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air around them grew still, the night falling into an eerie silence. Then suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers, soft and distant, as if the spirits were finally at peace. Amma gasped, clutching her chest for a moment. Kofi feared the worst, but then she let out a breath, her eyes filling with tears. "It's over," she whispered, her voice shaking with relief. I feel lighter." Kofi smiled, his heart swelling with relief and joy. The curse of the Ogbanje had been broken. Amma was free. The following days brought a sense of calm to both Kofi and the village of Akyem. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long seemed to lift. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Kofi slept without the haunting dreams. The village, unaware of the danger that had lurked in their midst, continued on with their daily lives, oblivious to the fact that they had been spared from a terrible fate. Amma, too, seemed to change. The sorrow and fear that had clouded her eyes for so long were gone, replaced by a brightness that Kofi had seen in her eyes for years. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and though the memory of what had happened still lingered between them, it no longer held the same power over her. One evening, as they sat by the river, Amma turned to Kofi, her expression thoughtful. "I still don't understand everything, why the Ogbanje chose me, or why it was allowed to live among us for so long. But I'm grateful, Kofi. I'm grateful that you were there to help me when I needed it most." Kofi looked at her, his heart swelling with affection for his friend. "You don't have to understand everything, Amma. What matters is that you are free now. The spirits, my ancestors, they guided me to help you, and together we stopped something that could have brought harm to the village." Amma smiled, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "I suppose we did." They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared experience hanging between them like a bridge connecting their souls. For Kofi, the journey had been more than just a task given to him by his ancestors. It had been a test of his courage, his loyalty, and his faith in the unseen world. And now, as he sat beside Amma, he knew that he had passed that test, not because he had followed the Spirit's guidance, but because he had believed in the power of friendship and in Amma's strength to overcome the darkness within her. The village of Akyem would never know the full story of what had transpired that night beneath the old tree. They would never know that a powerful spirit had been living among them, threatening to bring grief and sorrow upon the village. But Kofi and Amma would always remember. Kofi continued to listen to the wind, to the whispers of the spirits that guided him, guided his path. He knew that his journey wasn't over, that there would always be new challenges, new dangers lurking in the shadows, but he also knew that he wasn't alone.
And that is the end of the journey of Kofi, the curse of the Ogbanje Part 2. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you for staying till the end. Bye for now, and stay well and stay blessed.